Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
The orchestra had barely finished its opening piece when the entire Windsor ballroom seemed to freeze. Prince Harry crossed the floor, ignored the place card prepared for him, and lowered himself into the chair reserved for Prince William. King Charles watched from the head table, his expression hardening with every passing second. Then, without offering an explanation, the monarch stood, turned away from his guests, and walked out of the gala. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry did not move. One hand rested beside William's untouched place card, while the conversations around him collapsed into silence. The Windsor Gala had been arranged with precision, bringing together senior royals, diplomats, charity leaders, and palace officials. Every chair had been assigned by rank and ceremonial importance, because seating at such an event was never about comfort. It told the room who stood closest to the crown and who carried the monarchy's future. Charles understood that meaning immediately. William's chair had been placed beside him because the Prince of Wales, the title held by the monarch's direct heir, was being presented not merely as a son, but as the future king. Harry had been given another place, and before entering the ballroom, an aide had privately warned him that the central arrangement could not be changed. There had been no confusion. He knew exactly what the chair represented. The king looked first at his younger son, then toward the empty doorway through which William was expected to appear. For one painful second, disappointment seemed to outweigh anger. Then his hand tightened against the table, his chair moved back, and he rose with a restraint more frightening than any shouted command. Harry remained rigid, refusing to surrender the seat, as every nearby guest watched for hesitation. A senior courtier stepped forward and quietly slid William's place card from beneath Harry's hand. The gesture was controlled, but its meaning was brutal. The prince had turned a family grievance into a public challenge, and everyone understood that Charles's departure was not a pause. It was a verdict. Camilla stayed seated as the ballroom doors closed behind her husband. Princess Anne raised one hand toward the palace staff, silently ordering them not to follow. She knew the king needed distance, not an escort. The certainty in her face suggested that this confrontation had begun long before the gala. But Harry's decision could not be understood by looking at the chair alone, because every person around that table knew exactly whose history, pride, and unresolved pain had just been placed upon it. For William, the chair represented duty. For Harry, it represented everything he believed had been denied to him. Between those two meanings stood a father who had spent years trying to prevent private wounds from becoming public acts of rebellion. Yet inside Windsor that evening, the family's careful silence collapsed. One brother had not even entered the room, while the other had already turned his absence into the most visible challenge of the night. William stopped in the private corridor before reaching the ballroom doors. An aide approached carefully and explained that Harry had taken the reserved chair beside Charles and had refused to move. The prince's face shifted from confusion to restrained hurt, but he did not ask who had witnessed it or how the guests had reacted. He asked only, "Did my father see it?" The answer came quietly. Yes. The king had seen everything. The title Prince of Wales marked William as the monarch's direct heir, the person expected to carry the crown into its next chapter. His position beside Charles therefore reflected growing responsibility, not personal favor. That was why the empty chair mattered. It represented years of preparation, public duty, and the silent promise that the future king would stand beside his father when the monarchy faced pressure. Harry remained seated inside the ballroom. Silence pressed around him, yet he refused to rise. He believed that moving would look like surrender, and prove that he no longer had a place near the center of his own family. Although he had stepped away from senior royal duty, he still carried the emotional expectations of a son who wanted belonging without accepting every boundary placed around him. Charles had personally approved the invitation, despite weeks of resistance from advisors. The monarch believed the gala could become a first quiet step toward reconciliation, a night where Harry could return without speeches, negotiations, or public promises. Yet the king had hidden one painful detail. William had learned only hours earlier that his brother would attend because his father feared the heir might withdraw if given time to object. Princess Anne watched William fold the gala program tighter between his hands. She recognized that his stillness was not calm, it was control. The more carefully he chose his words, the closer his anger came to breaking through. Anne moved nearer, but the prince did not look at her. His attention remained fixed on the doors behind which Harry still occupied the place meant for him. William finally lowered the program and made his decision. He would not enter the ballroom, smile for the guests, and pretend that the insult had not happened. Instead, he asked to speak with Charles alone. The conflict had moved beyond Harry's refusal to leave a chair. It was now about the king's choice to invite him, conceal the decision, and gamble with the fragile trust between both sons. And when William turned away from the ballroom, the family was forced to confront the earlier moment that had made Harry believe this public challenge was his only remaining weapon. The Windsor walkout had not begun beneath chandeliers or in front of hundreds of startled guests. Its true beginning came 3 weeks earlier, inside a smaller room where only Charles, Harry, and 2 untouched dinner plates remained. What started as an attempt at reconciliation became a cold argument over titles, access, and William's future authority. By the time Harry left that private dinner, he no longer believed he was being welcomed home. He believed he was being managed. Charles had arranged the meeting at Clarence's house because he wanted to find a path back to his younger son without weakening the future already being prepared for William. The private residence gave them distance from palace officials and public ceremony, but it could not remove the tension between family affection and royal responsibility. Harry could be welcomed at selected gatherings, the king explained, yet he would not return to the duties or authority held by working members of the monarchy. The distinction mattered. Official royal duty meant representing the crown through ceremonies, public engagements, and decisions carried out in the sovereign's name. Charles wanted to remain a father in private, while protecting William's constitutional position as heir. To him, the boundary was necessary. To Harry, it sounded like another carefully worded rejection. Harry listened until the conversation reached future ceremonial events. Then, the king told him that William would always be seated beside the sovereign, while his younger brother would be placed farther down the table. The words landed harder than either man expected. Harry leaned back, stared at his father and said, "Then you have already decided I am no longer your son in public." Charles set down his fork. He answered that blood and duty could not be treated as the same thing, because one belonged to the family while the other belonged to the crown. The monarch meant to create clarity, but the sentence cut deeper than an open refusal. Harry heard that love would be offered privately, while honor would be displayed elsewhere. Harry stood before dessert arrived. He moved toward the doorway, then paused with one hand near the frame, as though waiting for his father to call him back. Charles remained seated. The silence lasted only seconds, yet it became the moment both men would later replay. The son left believing he had been dismissed. The father stayed behind, believing he had prevented another argument. Days later, Harry received the Windsor seating plan from the palace liaison managing his attendance. He circled William's chair in dark ink and returned the document without explanation. Princess Anne discovered the marked page during a private review and warned Charles that his son might be preparing a symbolic challenge. The king refused to cancel the invitation. Excluding Harry now, he said, would only confirm every fear voiced at that dinner. Harry made his intention clearer on the afternoon of the gala. When an aide reminded him that the seating could not be altered, He asked quietly, "Is that a request or a command?" The question revealed that the coming clash was no longer driven by hurt alone. It had become a deliberate test of who would bend first. That warning remained in Charles's mind as the ballroom doors closed behind him. But outside the gala, another confrontation was already forming between the father who had walked away and the heir who refused to walk in. Charles had taken only a few steps beyond the ballroom when William appeared at the opposite end of the corridor. Neither man raised his voice at first. They did not need to. The closed doors behind them held hundreds of guests, while the silence between father and son carried years of fear, resentment, and responsibility. William wanted to know why Harry had been placed in a position to humiliate him. Charles wanted to know whether his heir could still put the crown before his anger. William stopped several feet away, holding the folded gala program so tightly that its edge bent beneath his fingers. The corridor served as a private passage between Windsor's ceremonial rooms, allowing senior royals to move without crossing public areas. Tonight, that privacy made the confrontation more dangerous. Father and heir were expected to appear united during a major royal function, because their unity reassured guests that the monarchy remained steady. Their absence together now threatened the authority of the entire evening. William looked directly at his father. "Did you invite him to reconcile with us, or to test me?" Charles answered that he had invited Harry because a father could not permanently close the door on his son. The response did not calm the prince. It sharpened the wound. Harry had not merely taken a chair, William argued. He had occupied the heir's place beside the sovereign and forced diplomats, courtiers, and family members to watch the crown hesitate over its own future. The line of succession, the formal order deciding who inherits the throne, depended on visible certainty. For those few minutes inside the ballroom, that certainty had been turned into a public question. Charles accused his elder son of treating every family wound as a constitutional emergency. William answered without looking away. His father, he said, kept treating deliberate provocations as cries for help. The king flinched at the words, because both accusations carried truth. He had wanted to save one son without admitting how much pressure that decision placed upon the other. Princess Anne stepped forward from the far end of the passage. She had kept her distance, but silence was no longer protecting anyone. Anne revealed that she had shown Charles the seating plan, marked with a dark circle around William's chair, and had warned him that Harry might be preparing a symbolic act. William turned toward the king in disbelief. His father had known confrontation was possible and had still allowed the evening to proceed. Charles admitted that he believed Harry would stop before crossing the final line. The confession exposed the deeper reason for his walkout. He was furious with his younger son, but he was also confronting the failure of his own judgment. William made his position clear. He would not enter while Harry remained in the reserved seat. Charles refused to send palace guards to remove his son, knowing that physical intervention would transform a family crisis into a public humiliation that could never be undone. The deadlock settled between them. Neither father nor heir would move, while Harry remained seated behind the closed doors. Anne watched both men and understood that waiting would only deepen the damage. With the king outside, the heir refusing to enter, and Harry refusing to rise, authority inside the ballroom passed silently to the royal, who had spent a lifetime acting when others hesitated. Princess Anne did not hurry when she returned to the ballroom. That made her entrance more powerful. Guests watched her cross the floor without speaking to an aide, consulting a document, or seeking permission from the king. Harry remained in William's chair, his expression fixed. Camilla sat motionless at the head table. Then Anne stopped beside her nephew, placed one hand on the chair's carved back, and made it clear that the family's hesitation had ended. Anne carried influence without needing to display it. As Charles's trusted sister and one of the monarchy's most disciplined working royals, She had spent years protecting ceremony, order, and continuity, without seeking greater rank for herself. She held no constitutional authority over Harry, meaning she could not legally command him as the king might command an official. Yet within the family, her honesty carried a force that courtiers often lacked, and relatives rarely dared to ignore. Anne looked down at Harry with disappointment rather than fury. That made her words harder to dismiss. "You have made your point," she said quietly. "Do not make it impossible for your father to forgive you." Harry's jaw tightened. He answered that forgiveness which required him to accept permanent humiliation was not forgiveness at all. To him, every chair placed farther away, every reduced role, and every formal boundary repeated the same message. He still belonged by blood, but no longer by importance. The protest had become his way of refusing that message, even if the entire room now judged him for it. Camilla watched the exchange with growing anxiety. Charles's empty place made the royal table appear leaderless, and every passing second weakened the calm she was trying to preserve. The queen consort, the wife of the reigning monarch, who supports the sovereign without inheriting his governing authority, considered stepping forward, then stopped herself. She feared that intervening would turn one family conflict into another struggle over who had the right to speak for the king. Anne did not look away from Harry. She told him William was waiting outside and would not enter while his brother occupied the reserved seat. The words changed the weight of the moment. His symbolic challenge was no longer aimed only at palace rules or his father's judgment. It was actively keeping William from joining the gala and forcing their private pain onto everyone around them. Harry remained seated, but his certainty began to fracture. Anne saw it and acted before pride could rebuild the wall. She did not order him to stand. Instead, she turned to the attendants and instructed them to remove the chair. The command stunned the table. Harry rose as the attendants lifted it away, leaving an empty space beside Charles's vacant place. In one movement, Anne stripped the object of its power. There was no seat left to occupy, defend, or surrender. Harry stood in silence for a moment. Then he ignored his assigned place and walked toward the corridor where Charles and William were waiting. His protest had ended, but the reckoning had only begun. The chair had been removed, but the challenge it represented was now moving toward the two men whose approval Harry had spent years seeking and resisting in equal measure. Music resumed inside the ballroom, but the gala had already lost its center. Guests lifted glasses, exchanged careful smiles, and pretended not to notice the vacant places at the royal table. Behind closed doors, Harry moved toward his father, while William stood between anger and exhaustion. The public event continued, because royal events always continued. Yet every polished gesture now carried the weight of a family that could no longer hide its divisions behind ceremony. Palace officials restarted the program because stopping it completely would turn a family crisis into an institutional collapse. The monarchy depended on continuity, especially before diplomats, charity leaders, and senior guests who had come to see order at the heart of the crown. Yet the king, the heir, and Harry were all missing, leaving the room to continue without the three men at the center of the conflict. Camilla felt every empty place beside her. An aide quietly asked her to receive the next charity speaker in Charles's place, forcing her to carry the evening forward without knowing whether her husband intended to return. The queen consort gripped the edge of her program beneath the table, held it for a moment, then slowly relaxed her hand. She stood with a calm expression, refusing to let the audience see how deeply the walkout had shaken her. William remained in the corridor, humiliated that his reserved place had become the evening's main spectacle. The chair represented duty, but now it also carried anger, rivalry, and public embarrassment. He wanted Harry to answer for the insult, yet he feared that an open confrontation would make him appear cold and unforgiving. Every option seemed to punish him. Harry reached the passage and stopped when he saw his father. Charles did not need to speak immediately. The disappointment in his face weakened the defiance that had carried his younger son across the ballroom. Harry had expected anger he could resist. He had not expected silence that felt like grief. Charles finally told him the seat had never measured love. It represented duty, the burden carried by the person expected to stand beside the sovereign and eventually inherit the crown. By using it to challenge William, Harry had forced his father to choose between his sons in front of the entire institution. The king's voice remained controlled, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. Harry admitted that he had expected Charles to defend him against William's anger. He had believed the protest would force reassurance, not separation. The chair was meant to make his father prove that he still mattered. Instead, the monarch had walked away, leaving him exposed before the whole room. Charles refused to offer the comfort Harry had tried to demand through defiance. He looked from one son to the other and asked them to follow him into a smaller chamber. No aides, no guests, no titles to protect them. For the first time that night, the conflict was stripped of ceremony, leaving only a father and two sons with nowhere left to hide behind their positions. The room Charles chose contained no throne, no ceremonial table, and no waiting advisors. He entered first, followed by William and Harry, then closed the door himself. For several seconds, none of them spoke. Without uniforms, place cards, or witnesses, the crisis looked smaller but felt more dangerous. The argument was no longer about who sat beside the king. It was about which son believed he had lost him, and which son feared he would never be allowed to lead. Charles pointed toward two ordinary chairs placed the same distance from his own. The modest sitting room had been chosen because nothing said there could be treated as an official negotiation or hidden behind palace procedure. He wanted both sons to speak as family, not as rival figures inside the monarchy. By removing rank from the room, the king also removed the shield each man had used throughout the night. William sat first, but his body remained tense. He told Harry that seeing him in the reserved chair had not felt like a joke or even a protest. It had felt like a declaration that his brother still considered his future role illegitimate. The prince had spent years preparing to carry responsibility he had never freely chosen, and the public challenge made that burden look like something open to negotiation. Harry lowered his eyes before answering. He admitted that the chair had represented more than status. To him, it stood for the family life he once believed would always remain open, even after he stepped away from royal duty. He had watched every formal distance grow wider, and had begun to treat each boundary as proof that he was being erased. Charles finally spoke with a honesty he had delayed for too long. He confessed that he kept avoiding firm boundaries because he feared losing Harry completely. Yet every compromise offered to his younger son had left William feeling that his own place could be weakened whenever guilt entered the room. The monarch had tried to protect both men and had instead made each one feel betrayed. Harry looked directly at his brother. He admitted that he knew the chair belonged to William and had chosen it because he wanted their father to react. The protest had been deliberate. He had turned private pain into public humiliation and forced the entire family to witness it. William did not forgive him immediately. He did not offer comfort or pretend the damage was small. Instead, he said, "I needed you to admit that." The sentence changed the room. For the first time, neither brother was speaking through aides, formal statements, or carefully prepared messages. They were speaking to each other. Charles made the next step clear. The three of them would return to the gala together, but only after Harry accepted his assigned place, and William agreed not to use the incident as a reason to close the door forever. Both sons hesitated. Then each gave a quiet nod. Their agreement ended the private standoff, but the world outside Windsor had already captured the empty chair, the king's departure, and the silence that no palace explanation could erase. By the time the royal trio returned to the ballroom, The moment had escaped Windsor. A single photograph showed the king's chair pushed back, William's place card abandoned, and Harry standing beside the empty space, while Anne reached for the chair. It contained no shouting and revealed no private words. Yet to millions watching from outside the castle walls, it looked like the monarchy had briefly lost control of its own family. Palace communications staff first described Charles's departure as a short private interruption. The explanation was meant to protect the gala, calm invited guests, and prevent one family dispute from becoming a crisis for the crown. But the image of the disturbed seating plan made that story impossible to sustain. William's place card, the missing chair, and Harry's position beside the royal table told a clearer story than any carefully prepared sentence. Officials faced a brutal choice. Confirming the argument would deepen the scandal and expose private tensions inside the family. Denying it would insult the many diplomats, charity leaders, and palace staff who had witnessed the disruption. They released no detailed statement, hoping silence would contain the damage. Instead, silence allowed the public to fill every gap. The next morning, the Daily Chronicle carried a full-width photograph beneath the headline, "The Seat That Divided Windsor." The front page turned one private act into a national symbol. The empty space no longer belonged only to William. It became a question about duty, resentment, brotherhood, and whether the crown could keep family pain from controlling public responsibility. A crowd gathered near the Henry II Gate outside Windsor Castle. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Brothers before titles." Another answered that duty could not survive without boundaries. Their exchange captured the argument spreading across Britain. Some saw Harry as a wounded son demanding recognition. Others saw a deliberate challenge to the future king. William watched a broadcaster replay the image and felt the humiliation return. The most painful moment of his evening had been reduced to a public debate about entitlement and succession. The prince knew viewers were judging his silence without hearing the words spoken behind the closed doors. Harry faced a different wound. Commentators described him as either a rejected son or a calculated disruptor, and he realized his attempt to force reassurance had placed his motives on public trial. The reaction he wanted from Charles had become an argument he could no longer control. The palace finally released one carefully chosen photograph showing Charles walking between both sons after the gala. The message was deliberate. Harry's protest had not destroyed the family, and William's anger had not ended all contact. Yet the picture offered unity without explaining its price. Charles understood that an image could calm the public, but could not settle the truth. That evening, he began preparing a final written statement for both sons, defining exactly where family love would remain open and where royal authority would never bend again. The public saw three men leave Windsor side by side, but only they knew that the king's final decision would determine whether the night became a temporary wound or the permanent shape of their future. Charles did not punish Harry with exile, and he did not ask William to pretend the insult had never happened. Instead, the king delivered a harder judgment. Love would remain open, but rank would no longer be negotiated through emotion. Harry would be welcomed as a son at private family gatherings, while William's ceremonial position as heir would be protected without apology. The chair at Windsor had exposed their deepest fracture, but it also forced the boundaries that silence had postponed for too long. Charles sent both sons the same written family agreement. It was not a royal decree, meaning it carried no force of law and did not act as an official command of the crown. It was something more personal, a clear promise about how future meetings, ceremonies, and family gatherings would be handled. William's place beside the sovereign at official events would remain protected, while Harry could attend selected private occasions without being presented as a working royal. Harry read his copy alone. At first, the formal wording made his expression tighten, because every boundary still felt like another reminder of what he had lost. Then he reached the final line, written by his father's own hand. "No seat can remove your place in my life." The words did not erase the humiliation of Windsor, but they gave him the reassurance he had tried to force through defiance. William folded his letter carefully. He understood that protecting his future role did not require demanding his brother's permanent exclusion. The prince could defend the authority of the heir without turning authority into cruelty. That distinction mattered, because the monarchy could not ask the public to believe in duty while allowing bitterness to destroy the family carrying it. Harry sent William a direct written apology. He admitted that he had taken the chair to provoke a reaction and had used the gala to turn private pain into public pressure. The heir replied that trust would not return through words alone. It would need to be rebuilt through conduct, patience, and respect for boundaries neither brother could ignore again. Charles also confirmed that his sons would not appear together at another formal event until both privately agreed they were ready. The king refused to let the palace stage artificial unity merely to calm public opinion. A photograph could create an image of peace, but only honest behavior could make that peace real. Several days later, the three men met for a private breakfast without aides. Harry reached an open chair, paused, and waited for William to sit first. He then took the place opposite him. Charles noticed the gesture but said nothing. He understood that the smallest act of respect carried more meaning than any carefully prepared speech. The Windsor Gala did not magically restore the family. It ended the dangerous illusion that love, rank, anger, and duty could remain undefined. Harry accepted that belonging did not grant equal authority. William accepted that authority did not demand emotional cruelty. Charles finally acted as both father and king by refusing to sacrifice either truth. The empty chair became a warning. The crown was weakest when private pain controlled public duty, but strongest when its members confronted that pain honestly and created boundaries without abandoning one another. There would be no further walkout, no second confrontation, and no uncertainty about what the night had decided. The brothers remained family. William remained the heir. Harry remained the king's son, and Charles would never again confuse reconciliation with surrender. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.